Hello, everybody. Welcome to another class in WebYeshiva. I'm David Sedley. We're talking about the Amida for the High Holidays, Yamim Menoraim. And today and next week, I want to speak about the Rosh Hashana Musaf, which hopefully will leave us 2 weeks to talk about the Yom Kippur Musaf. Now, everyone knows about Rosh Hashanah. Everyone has davened Musaf, the additional prayer on Rosh Hashanah before. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you, you'll say, yeah, I know that already. But I think I have some insights that are different, perhaps, than the way you've thought about it or looked at it before. So I guess what I'm saying is, if there's some repetition here or some things that are obvious, bear with me, because I think there'll be some things that you don't know as well, or at least haven't considered in quite the same way. Let's start with the structure. Why am I talking about Musaf and not Shacharit? Because Shacharit fundamentally is the same as every Shabbat and Yom Tov Shacharit, just with the additions for the Yamim Noraim. But Musaf is completely different than any other prayer service we have. Musaf Rosh Hashanah is different than any other prayer service we have during the year. So I want to speak about that. So let's talk about the structure of it and what makes it unique and different. The Tosefta says, Imru lefanai malchiot zichronot v'shofarot. God says, you should recite before me kingship, remembrance, and shofar. Why? Malchiot kadesh tamlichuni aleichem. Kingship, so that you can make me king over you. Zichronot, remembrance, kadesh yavo zichronchem letova, so that the remembrance of you will come before God for good. Imru lefanai shofrot, and you should say shofarot. Why? Kadesh ta'aleh tefilatchem b'truah lefanai, so that your prayers will ascend with a trumpeting before me. This is not quite the same as the Gemara, which we'll see shortly. But anyway, there's a Baraita, which means from the time of the Mishnah, the 2nd century CE in round numbers, and presumably that's recording a much older tradition, which says that on Rosh Hashanah we have to say to God verses of remembrance, of kingship, remembrance, and shofar, right? And kingship, that's the theme of the day, right? I mean, we changed all the brachas to end with HaMelech HaKadosh. We talk about God as king. Remembrance is, so we make God king. Remembrance is what God does for us. He remembers us, he judges us, we pass before him. And shofar is the magic that makes those two things happen together, according to the Tosefta. So let's start with why do we say, where is the source in the Torah that we should say these 3 concepts before God on Rosh Hashanah? So Vayikra, at the end of Parshat Emor, goes through all of the festivals. Right, end of Bamidbar we have, in Pasha Pinchas and Bamidbar we have the sacrifices for the festivals, but Emor we have the festivals and the unique characteristics of the festivals. So it says, B'chodesh HaShvi'i, in the 7th month, which is Tishrei, because we count from Nisan, B'echad l'chodesh, on the 1st of the month, that's Rosh Hashanah, Yalechem Shabbaton, you shall have a day of rest, a Shabbat. Zichron, Tru'ah, Mikra, Kodesh. Remembrance, blowing the shofar, a holy, convocation, holy event. So we see here, look, it says Zikaron, that's remembrance. It says Tru'ah, that's shofar. Great. We are 2/3 of the way to knowing why we have to say Malchiot, Zichron, and Shofrot on Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara asks, where's the source, the proof text that says we say these 3 concepts? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Dichtiv, it says Shabbaton, Zichron, Torah, Mikra, Kodesh. That's the verse I just showed you. Shabbaton, Ze Kedushat Hayom, that is the sanctity of the day, which is the blessing like we have in every Musaf, right? That today is Rosh Hashanah, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. We'll get to that shortly. Zikaron, Elu Zikronot, right? Remembrances. Truah, Elu Shofarot. And then Mikra Kodesh, Kadshehu B'asiyat Melacha, sanctified by not doing any melacha, any work on that day. Well, what's missing from this verse? Where's kingship? Isn't that the most important? Isn't that the theme? Isn't that the whole point of Rosh Hashanah, is that we make God king? How come that's missing from the Torah? So, Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, mipnei ma lo ne'mar Shabbaton Shavut, Shabbat Aktuv, Shabbat Patach Aktuv Tchila. Why don't you say that the word Shabbaton means rest? That's how the verse started, right? Ella. So he doesn't, in other words, he doesn't like the way everybody else has read the verse. So Rabbi Akiva says, Shabbaton, Kachehu Basya Melacha. Shabbaton means sanctified by not doing work. Zikron elu zichronot, remember as a remembrance. Shura elu shofrot, Mikra Kodesh Kedushas Hayom. So he basically takes Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, but he thinks Mikra Kodesh and Shabbaton mean the opposite. They both think those two things mean the opposite things, but neither of them so far has explained why we have to say Malchut, why we have to say kingship. So the Gemara says, Menayin Shomrim Malchiot. Guys, you've forgotten about the most important thing of the day. Where's the verse that says you have to say kingship? Tanya, we have a Braita which says, Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Hanasi says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am the Lord your God. Or B'chodesh HaShvi'i, and then it says in the 7th month, Zo Malchut. So when it says, I am the Lord your God, that means Malchut. Well, that's great, but hang on a second. Where does it say that verse, Ani Hashem Elokeichem? Let's put it in context. The third verse here is what we just were talking about in the 7th month, first day. But it says, finishing off the laws of Shavuot, it says, when you harvest the harvest of your land, don't finish, don't harvest completely all the corners of your fields when you harvest, and don't pick up the sheaves that you've dropped. Leave them for the poor and for the strangers. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am the Lord your God. Well, that's nice. Thank you, God. That's talking about God somehow connected to the gifts for the poor when you're harvesting your field. Then, new subject. You see there's even a pay and squiggly brackets. That means there's a paragraph break here. Then it says, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. More God spoke to Moses saying, B'chodesh HaShvi, B'echad l'chodesh, etc., etc. So Rebbe wants to connect the last three words of this preceding verse, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and say that's why we have to say kingship on Rosh Hashanah, because it precedes the verses that talk about Rosh Hashanah. I mean, come on, right? It's talking about Shavuot. It's not talking about Rosh Hashanah. And if kingship is the most important thing, why isn't it included in the halachot of Rosh Hashanah in the Torah? And you've got a big gap in between. God speaks to Moses. So what I mean, okay. I mean, sure, Rebbe Yonasi said, can we do better? Have we got anything else? Well, luckily we do. Because Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says something different. He says, Eino tzarich. You don't have to say that answer of Rebbe, because that's like a wee bit far-fetched. Harei Homer, it says, right, forget about Vayikra. Let's go look in Bamidbar. It says, Vayu lachem lezikaron lefnei Elokeichem. Right? This is a day of remembrance before your God. She'ein Talmud lomar ani Hashem Elokeichem. Right, that verse ends with I am the Lord your God, and that's redundant over there. Omar Talmud lomar ani Hashem Elokeichem. So why does the verse end I am the Lord your God? Zeh b'na'av. This is lays down a principle. L'kol makom shene'amar bo zichronot. Every place which talks about remembrance, yom malchiot imahen. Whenever you say remembering things, you also should say kingship as well. Let's just look at what that verse is to see it in context, because often when you learn the Gemara, you say, okay, great, and then you move on. But you don't look at the verse, you don't realize how strange this is. So this is not as strange, perhaps, as Rebbe's verse. It says, V'yom simchatchem u'v'moadeichem u'v'roshei chodshechem, on the day of your rejoicing and your festivals and your Rosh Chodesh, you shall blow the trumpet, not a shofar, blow the trumpet to accompany your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. And they shall be as a remembrance before your God. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am the Lord your God. Okay, so I'm still not really convinced, if I'm honest. I don't know about you guys. But this has nothing to do with Rosh Hashanah. Right? This is talking about when you bring your sacrifices on every single festival and you blow the trumpet, which is not the shofar, then I am Lord your God, because it's Vayulachem Lezikaron, God's going to remember you, or you're going to remember God, whatever, on the festivals. I am the Lord your God. So that means every time we say Zichronot, which is only on Rosh Hashanah, we also have to say Kingship as well. And neither of the two verses we've been given even says the word king. It just says, I am the Lord your God. I mean, Avinu Malkeinu, God, maybe it means we should say fatherhood, not kingship. Maybe we should say all the other things that apply to God. So right now, I'm not convinced. If you guys are, then great. I hope if we have time, I will come back to this at the end and see that maybe I am convinced after all. But I do find, however we do with that, I find it strange that the main concept of Rosh Hashanah, which is kingship of God, is missing entirely from the Torah when it talks about Rosh Hashanah. Nevertheless, the halacha is that we say these three concepts. We'll learn next week. We say 10 verses for each. We'll talk about that next week. So the basic outline of Rosh Hashana Musaf, before I make things complicated, basic outline, we have the first three brachot that we have every single davening, right? Avot, Magen Avot, then we have Mechayim Eitim, and then we have Kedusha, right, which is Ziv HaKel HaKadosh, HaMelech HaKadosh, and then we have the section of kingship, Malchiot, then we have the section of remembrance, Zichronot, and then we have the section of Shofarot, like the Gemara says, and then we end with the last three brachot, which are, Modim, Anachnolach, Ve'al Kol, and Simshon. Great, perfect, excellent. That's the basic structure. And so the interesting thing, or the unique thing on Rosh Hashanah, right? The first three, the last three are the same on every davening. The unique thing on Rosh Hashanah is these three middle ones. We have 9 brachot in total, and this is the only time of the year that we have 9 brachot in the Amida. But you may notice, right, I guess according to Rebbe, this works a little bit. The order of the verses, according to Rebbe, was first kingship, then remembrance and shofar. Let's go back to that verse, right? So Ani Hashem Elokeichem, says Rebbe, that's kingship, and then Zikaron is over here. That is in the third verse. That's remembrance, and Truah is shofar. So that's right order. According to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, so why would we start with Malchiot? That comes in the Torah, a whole book later on. Sifri says, Ma ra'u chachamim lama Malchiot tchila. Why did the rabbis decide that we should begin with kingship, v'achar kach zichronot v'shofrot, and then remembrance and shofar? Elehem licho alecha tchila, because you must make him your king first. V'achar kach bikesh rachamim lefanav. Only afterwards can you pray, can you ask God for mercy that he will remember you in a good way. Oh, but man, how do we pray that he will remember us in a good way? Or how do we make him king? B'shofar. So the order of the three is not coming from the verse according to this Sifri. Sifri is also literature from the time of the Tanaim. The structure of the service is really coming from logic. If you don't have a king, you can't ask him to be merciful, right? You can't ask him to remember you. So first you need the king, then you ask him to remember you, and you do that using the shofar. Great. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Okay, so we have a slight problem though, which some of you, yeah, hey, thank you, Michael. Slight problem that every Amidah, especially every Musaf, or every Amidah, and every Musaf talks about the festival, right? In the structure we have of these blessings, there's nothing actually about, it doesn't say Rosh Hashanah anywhere here. And we need to have a blessing saying today's Rosh Hashanah, and that's called Kedushat Hayom, the sanctity of the day. So let's look at that, right? This is what the words say in the Musaf, Kedushat Hayom, right? It's a bit confusing because we have Kedusha, which is the third of the first three blessings, which ends with Hamelech HaKadosh, right? Atah Kadosh, Shemcha Kadosh, etc. But and that's sanctifying God. And then we have Kedushat Hayom, where we sanctify the day, which we do in a similar structure on all of the festivals. Atah v'chatanu mikol ha'amim, you chose us from all the nations. Ahavta otanu v'ratzita banu, you love us and you want us. V'ramamtanu mikol ha'shnot, you elevated us. Kidashtanu b'mitzvotech, you sanctified us with your mitzvot. V'keraftanu malkeinu avodotecha, you brought us close, our King, to your service. Shemcha gadol b'gashalei karata. Right? We say this every Musaf, right? V'titin lanu Hashem Elokeinu b'ahava, and give us God in love. Now, if it's Shabbat, you add Shabbat. It's not Shabbat. At Yom HaZikaron hazeh, this day of remembrance. Yom Torah Mikra Kodesh Zech Yisrael, the day of the shofar, a holy convocation, a remembrance of Exodus from Egypt. It's interesting. I only just realized now that we leave out Malchiot from this, don't we? We just talk about Yom HaZikaron hazeh, the day of remembrance, which is Yom Teruah, day of blowing the shofar, which fits perfectly with the verse, but seems at odds with what we do about making God king on Rosh Hashana. Okay, and then we continue. Because we sinned, we've been exiled from the land, and therefore we can't go to the temple like we'd like to, and we can't do all the things that we need to do in the temple. So please, God, bring us back from our exile so that we'll be able to come to the temple and do the sacrifices. You'll bring us to Zion, and we'll bring our sacrifices that we're supposed to bring for the Musaf offering, etc., etc., etc. And then we just say the specific verses relevant. Again, we do the same thing on Shabbat, right? And Rosh Chodesh and every other festival, just changing slightly. Yom Teruah Lachem, that's the verse we spoke about from Emor. Those are the sacrifices that we do on Rosh Hashanah. We bring along that with the mincha, the flour offering, and the wine offering, and the different measurements, right? As well as the additional daily sacrifices, etc., etc. So, where are we going to fit that into a nice, neat structure of our 9 blessings? Right? 3, 3, and 3, but now we have an extra one we have to fit in as well. So that is going to cause some problems. Let's just first talk about why we have to have 9 blessings. Why not have 10? If you're already having 9, make 10 blessings on Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, Hani Tisha de Rosh Hashanah keneged mi. The 9 blessings that we say on Rosh Hashanah in the Amidah, what do they correspond to? Am Rabbi Yitzchak de min Kartigenin. Rabbi Yitzchak says, maybe he's from Carthage. He says, Keneged Tisha as Karot she'amra Hannah betfilata. These correspond to the 9 mentions of God's name that Hannah said in her prayer. Wow, that's great. So let's look at those 9 mentions of God that Hannah says in her prayer. Hannah, of course, is the mother of Shmuel. Shmuel is very much associated with kingship. He anoints not 1 but 2 kings. First Saul, the first king, and then David, the first king from the house of Judah. So great. And also this is the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah. So we're in Hannah mode, right? We're thinking about Hannah and her prayer. And apparently it she says God's name 9 times here. Let's have a look. Vatit palel Hannah v'tomer. Hannah prayed and she said, Aletz libi b'Hashem. My heart exalts in the Lord. So that's 1. If you got enough fingers, you can count. Ramah krani b'Hashem. Whoops, I forgot to count that one. My horn is elevated for God. So that's 2, even though I didn't bold it. Rachav pi aloivai ki semachti b'shuati. My mouth is wide over my enemy because I'm rejoicing in my salvation. Ein kadosh kashem. There's no one holy like God. That's 3. Ki ein biltecha. There's no one like you. Ve'en tzur ke'Elokeinu. There's no rock like God. Now, I'm not going to count Elokeinu because that's not the 4-letter name of God. Al tirbu tadabru gavoah gavoah. Don't speak high and proud and mighty. Yetziatak mipichem. All this arrogance out of your mouth. Ki kel de'ot Hashem, because God is a knowing God. Again, I'm not going to count kel but I am going to count Hashem, so that makes 4. Velo nit kanu alilot, and through him the actions are measured. Keshigibrum chitim and ichshelim azruchayil, the arrows of the mighty are broken, and the warriors falter. Sveim belechem niskaru urevim chadalu. The people who are sated end up hungry, and the hungry people aren't hungry anymore. Yalda Adakara Yalda Shiva Virabat Banim Umlala. The barren woman has had 7 children, and the mother of many is forlorn. Hashem Memitu Mechem Orid Shal Vayal. God, that's 5 if I'm counting correctly. God kills and brings to life, takes down to Sheol, to hell, whatever, and brings up. Hashem Morisho Mashir, that's 6. God makes rich and poor. Mashpil af maramem, he lowers and he makes high. Mekim me'afadam me'ashpochim mevion. This is very similar to what we say in Hallel, right? In Tehillim 113. Mekim me'afadam me'ashpochim mevion. God raises the poor off the dunghill, whatever. Lashivim devim, to seat them with the princes. V'kisei kvod yanchilem, he gives them a throne of glory. Ki lashem metzukei eretz v'yeshet aleim tevel, he grants them seats of honor. Well, for the pillars of earth are the Lord's, he has set the world upon them. That he is just small by mistake. And then, so that's 7. Raglei chasidav yishmoru Hashem b'choshech yidamu. The footsteps of the righteous he protects, and the wicked to stumble in the dark. Lo b'koch yikbar ish. Hashem yichato merivo. The enemies of God, that's number 8, will be shattered. Alo b'shamayim yerem Hashem, that's number 9. Right, it goes to the heavens. Yadin afse aretz. I say I've read that wrong. Alo b'shamayim yerem Hashem yadin afse aretz. God will judge the edges of the earth. Vayten oz lemalkov yerem keren mashiachai. He will give strength to his king and raise the horn of his anointed one. So that's the 9 mentions of God's name in Hannah's prayer, and that's why we have to have 9 blessings in the Amidah of Rosh Hashanah, and we can't just squeeze the 10th one in, because then it won't be 9 anymore. I mean, we can't make it 10 instead of 9. So before I answer that question of where we're going to put this extra 10th prayer, I want to ask why are we talking about Hannah all of a sudden? That's the best. We have to think about our whole Rosh Hashanah davening because of Hannah. I mean, she was a great woman and all that. I don't want to take that away from her, but what's her connection to Rosh Hashanah? Well, I've already said we read the Haftarah, this as the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah, but that just says, okay, so why do we read that as the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah? So let's talk about Hannah. The Gemara says, Rosh Hashanah nifkeda Sarah Rachel v'Chana. Right, we have an Amora who says that on Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah fell pregnant, and therefore they were like remembered on this day, and that's why we connect our prayer to Hannah's prayer, because she got pregnant on Rosh Hashanah. Now it's a big deal, right? Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah were all barren for many years and all suffered from not having children, and then they have children because God judged them, blessed them, they conceived. That's a big deal, but I mean, we don't say the Amidah corresponding to Sarah's prayer or to Rachel's prayer. So why specifically Hannah? What's this? You know, when you list 3 and you say no, but Hannah's the important one, why so? The Yerushalmi gives a slightly different explanation. Also it connects to Hannah, but it says the Tisha Rosh Hashanah 9, right? Where do we learn that there are 9 blessings on Rosh Hashanah? Amar Rabbi Abba Mikati Ginai. Again, Rabbi Abba from Carthage says, Kenega Tisha Azkarot, Shekha Pasha Chana. 9 times God's name is mentioned in Hannah's prayer. Uchtiv B'sof, and it says at the end of that prayer, Hashem Yadin Afseretz. God will judge to the edge of the earth. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment, so therefore the connection between Hannah and Rosh Hashanah. Cool, great, but also the Torah says, or Tanakh says, judgment lots and lots of times. I'm not yet convinced that of the connection between Hannah and Rosh Hashanah, such that we have to say the Amidah for according to the number of prayers that Hannah said. Let's just step back a minute and just who was Hannah? And I know this is very obvious and you know it all, but let's just talk. Who was Hannah and why do we care about her and her prayer? And then maybe that will enlighten us as to why we care so much about her on Rosh Hashanah. Hashem, that's the verse we talked about that talks about God judging the world. So when did Hannah live, right? Or when did Hannah pray? So where the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, Moshe dies on the other side of the Jordan. Joshua leads the Jews into Israel. The book of Joshua is basically a book of conquest. And I guess if you had to chart it on a graph, you'd say they started off pretty high up because they've just come from the desert where they've been learning Torah for 40 years. And along comes Joshua and they go even higher. They've conquered the land. They've now got the promised land. They didn't conquer all of it. It was didn't do quite a good job, but they've definitely, improved the situation where the Jewish people are supposed to be. Then we come to the book of Shoftim, of Judges, and basically, if you plot out the book of Judges, the entire thing is a huge disaster from beginning to end. It starts off bad and ends absolutely terrible, and every couple of chapters, the Jews are bad. God sends someone to attack them, and then they pray, and then God sends a judge to save them. And then they are saved and they go back to being bad again and they just get worse and worse and worse. And the only good thing in the whole book of Shoftim is Devorah, basically. There's that highlight of the Shirat Devorah, the victory of Devorah in her song. Everything else I'm going to say, Shimshon, you're going to look to Shimshon as a high point of Jewish life, or Gidon, or Yiftach, or the whole. So if you're sure, we start off high and we go higher. In Shoftim, we basically get right back down to the bottom as low as we can be. It's a pretty disastrous time. 300 years or something? Pretty disastrous time for the Jewish people. And then we get to the book of Shmuel. And the book of Shmuel, basically we climb back up again. This is the inflection point. Hannah's prayer is the shift, is the switch from the time of the judges, when everyone's doing whatever they want and there's no rules and there's no order and there's no one in charge. And the book of Shmuel is about appointing a king and taking control and all the people working, serving God. And it ends just before the temple is built. So that takes us back up to like the highest point of the Jewish, in Jewish history. By the end of Shmuel, we've reached even higher than we were by the end of Sefer Yehoshua. So Hannah's prayer comes at this moment. We're at our lowest point, and we're about to turn the corner and head towards our highest point. And then the book of Kings, Shlomo builds the temple, but even then he's with wives and the concubines in his own house, and it's not clear. And Hiram of Tyre is involved, and after that, forget about it. There's just one terrible king after another in Israel. The splitting the kingdom, disaster. Israel, all the kings are terrible. In Judah, there's a couple of good kings that kind of prolong the inevitable, but Kings is a disaster. So it's kind of like a sine wave that Yeshua would go up, Shoftim would go down, Shmuel would go up again, and Malachim would go down again. And Hannah's prayer is at this inflection point of the lowest point, right before we turn the corner, or because of Hannah's prayer, or because of Shmuel, who's Hannah's son. That's why we turn the corner. And change that. So that's the historical context. And so it seems obvious to me that this is a moment of Hannah's prayer comes at a moment of judging the future of the Jewish people. Right? We could have easily continued going down on our slide from Shoftim, or we could have plateaued and stayed where we were. And Hannah, this is a moment when kind of history takes a breath and God looks at the world and says, okay, now we're changing trajectory. We're going somewhere else. So for that alone, it makes sense to me that Hannah's prayer and Hannah's story are closely connected to Rosh Hashanah. If Rosh Hashanah is about making God into a king, so I think that can only, in the time of the Shoftim, when you don't know what a king is, it's really hard to make God into a king because you don't have any kings. You don't know what a king is. I've thought for many years this is that the way Americans approach God is very different than the way British and Commonwealth people approach God, because the concept of kingship is so ingrained and integral to British and Commonwealth life that it's easy to transfer that and imagine it to turn that into God. Whereas Americans, since George III, when kings are a bad thing, so that changes the relationship with God. That's a digression. So I think that itself is perhaps a reason why it makes sense to have Hannah here in Rosh Hashanah, because of the inflection point of the trajectory of the heading now to kingship and to God judging and remembering the Jewish people and changing their trajectory. I want to look at the story of Hannah and how we got chapter 2 as her prayer, but what happened in chapter 1? And this comes right after the disaster that is the end of Sefer Shoftim, which I don't want to even talk about. It's so bad, but two terrible events, historic events, which led to idol worship and civil war. Don't want to go there. So we begin Sefer Shmuel. Vayi ish echad min Ramatayim Tzofim. There was a man from a place called Ramatayim Tzofim, Mehar Ephraim, from Mount Ephraim. Shmuel Kana ben Yerocham ben Elihu ben Tocho ben Sor Ephrati, and his name was Elkanah ben Yoram ben Elihu ben Tochu, the Ephraimite. V'lo shtei nashim, and he has two wives. Shem echad Chana, the first wife is called Hannah. V'shem eshenit Penina, the second wife is called Penina. Vayile Penina yeladim, u'lachana ein yeladim. Penina had children, Hannah didn't have children. This is right. This parallels the story of Sarah, where Hagar had children, Sarah didn't have children. Parallels the story of Rachel, where Leah had children, Rachel didn't have children. So the same thing. Hannah had no children, Penina did have children. And this man used to go from his city, from time to time, from day to day, to bow and offer sacrifices to God in Shiloh. Shiloh was where the Mishkan was located. That's where people went. V'sham shnei bnei Eli, Chofni or Pinchas, kohanim l'Hashem. And who was in charge of Shiloh? Well, Eli was the high priest. He was in charge, but actually he kind of outsourced the work to his two sons, Chofni and Pinchas, who, if you know anything about them, they were pretty bad guys, and so bad that people didn't want to go to Shiloh because they didn't want to have to deal with Chofni and Pinchas. So Rashi says, right? So Shiloh is there, God is there, the Mishkan is there, the Mizbeach is there. That's where people are supposed to go and sacrifice and worship and connect to, as a nation, come together, religiously come together. And Chofni and Pinchas are bad news. People aren't interested anymore. People are off doing their own thing. They're not interested in going to Shiloh. So Rashi says, Va'ala ha'ish lashon hovehu. This means he did it regularly. Haya olem izman moed lemoed. The Shiloh, he would go every yontiv to Shiloh. Midrash Agada, and the Midrash says, B'derech sheyaleh b'shana zo lo hayaleh b'shana acheret. If he went one route this time, he'd go a different route the next time to Shiloh. Right? He'd put into ways, and then he'd say to the other route, Kidei lashmiya Yisrael v'yasu kamoto, so that he'd go on his way. He would collect around him all the other people and say, "Come on, let's go together to Shiloh." And this way, more and more people are coming to Shiloh, kind of like Avram Avinu. Wherever he went, he'd gather followers who would follow his path. So Elkanah was that kind of person. He'd go and he'd say, "I know, but whatever, let's go to Shiloh because that's where it's supposed to be." And Shiloh became, again, the center because of Elkanah. Although behind every man, right, is his wives in this case. Vayihayom vayizbach Elkanah v'nasan lepnina ishto lekol banei b'notea manot. So when they got to Shiloh, Elkanah would bring a sacrifice, and he'd give gives meat to Penina and her sons and daughters. And and Hannah should get one portion. Ki et Hannah ahav, because he loved Hannah more than he loved Penina. Vashem sagar rachma, but God had closed her womb. V'ka'astat tzarata gam kas b'vo har ama, and her rival, meaning Penina, made Hannah's life miserable. Ki sagar shem bar rachma, because she was barren. So Penina would make fun of Hannah and say, I've got all the kids, you don't have anything. V'chein yaseh shana b'shana. This is what they'll do every single year. Midei alota b'veit Hashem, as they went to the house of God. Ken tachasena, she would taunt her every time. V'tivkeh v'lo tochal, Hannah would be crying and she wouldn't be able to eat. So this Penina doesn't seem like a very nice person at all. Poor Hannah sitting crying. But Rashi says, based on the Gemara, right? Why did Penina make her? How did Penina upset her, and why? Gam kas, kasacha kas, one thing after another. Penina would keep making fun of Hannah. Tamid lekach nema gam kas. She would always do it. Hayta omeret la. She'd say, Klum kanit hayom ma'aforet lebincha gadol. Did you buy any clothes for your son today? Or chaluk lebincha katan. Did you buy clothes for your younger son? Whatever they were doing, Penina would say, oh, look, I've got kids, I've got clothes for my kids, I've got food for my kids, I've got, school supplies for my kids, I've got shoes for my kids. Where's your, right? You make fun of her all the time. But why? The rabbis say that Penina wasn't doing it to be mean, but the opposite, Bavor harima, shetit onen. Penina wanted Hannah to be upset, to complain, V'rotenu amru, ba'avor harima shtit palel. Hashem shamayim nitkava. Penina wanted Hannah to feel her also should be able to pray with more kavanah, with more intent, with more desire. And so Penina's intent was to allow Hannah to pray better. And that's why she made her life miserable. So if we're talking about Hannah wanting to pray and being miserable, so that also is very nice. Rosh Hashana, we've gone through the year. We are praying to God to give us whatever we need for the coming year. But that's not the voice. That's not the prayer of Hannah that we're talking about. This is not. We don't say 9 blessings of Rosh Hashana because of this prayer of Hannah, which is asking for a kid, because everyone asks for a kid. Everyone asks whatever it is they don't have. Of course, they ask for that. That's no big deal. Everyone. Sarah asks for a kid. Rachel asks for a kid. Everybody asks for whatever they want all the time. That's not a big deal. The prayer that we say, the reason we say 9 brachot on Rosh Hashanah is because of Hannah's prayer in chapter 2, where she thanks God. She's got the kid already. Her prayers have been answered, and she goes back to Shiloh, and she prays, and she praises God for everything He's given her. And she appreciates the greatness of God and the gifts that God's given her. And that's something that we don't really find by Sarah so much, right? Sarah laughs when God tells her she's going to have a kid. She makes a party after Yitzchak is born, but we don't find a prayer of Sarah thanking God for the gift He's given. Rachel, right, is barren, then she has a kid. She says, Yosef, God, give me another kid, right? Yosef means to increase, to add. So she doesn't say, thank you, God, you've given me everything I want. She's asking for more. Hannah says, thank you, God. You've given me exactly what I needed. You've given me the tools I needed to do my job in the world. You've answered my prayers, and through that she sees the greatness of God, and that's what we're saying. That's what we say on Rosh Hashanah. The 9 blessings of Rosh Hashanah corresponding to Hannah appreciating everything that God's given her and thanking God. I'm not saying thank you, but she's seeing the greatness of God in the world, that He judges, that He supports the righteous, that He does everything. It's that prayer afterwards. We find very rarely such a prayer thanking God for a gift like that. We do have Shirat Hayam when the Jews praise God after being saved in the sea, and we have the Shirat Dvorav being prayed when Dvorav after being saved from Sisera and his army. Both of those are led by women. This is also a woman. There's something very feminine about the Rosh Hashanah prayers and Musaf. But I think that, as I'm making this up completely, feel free to disagree, but I think that the reason we have this connection between Hannah and Rosh Hashanah, A, because the inflection point in Jewish history, but B, that inflection point happened. The reason that Sefer Shmuel happened was not because Hannah prayed to have a son, because everyone would do such a thing, or Many people do. They will pray for whatever they need. But the fact that after God answered her, she appreciated what God had given. She recognized him as king, as judge, as remembrance, all of the things that the ideas of Rosh Hashanah, that if you don't believe that God has the power to give and desires to give and is good, then Rosh Hashanah is meaningless. No point in praying to God for anything if God doesn't have both the power and the desire to give what you want. And that's what Hannah's prayer is, and that's unique, virtually unique among the prayers that we have. And so that's why the close connection between Hannah and Rosh Hashanah and between the 9 blessings. So then we get stuck in a bit of a technical problem. Then we have 10 blessings, and we have to squeeze them into 9 slots available. So the Gemara discusses this. The Mishnah, first of all, says, say the brachot, how we're going to do these 10 brachot, but really make them 9. So, Amir Avot or Gvurot Kedusha Hashem, you say the first Avot, the first bracha, and Gvurot, the second bracha, Kedusha Hashem, right, which ends up at Hamelech HaKadosh, V'kolel Machiot Imehen, and you include kingship in the first, in the last of the first 3 brachot. And you don't blow the shofar there. That's not a point of shofar blowing. And then Kedushat Hayom V'tokea, then you say the Kedushat Hayom, sanctity of Rosh Hashanah, and you blow the shofar. Zichronot V'tokea, you say remembrance and blow the shofar. And Shofrot V'tokea, you say the verse of Shofrot and you blow the shofar. V'omer Avodah, Hodah, Birkat Kohanim, Tivri Yochanan ben Nuri. Then you say the last 3 brachot, and that is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's opinion. In terms of blowing the shofar, most Ashkenazi shuls don't blow the shofar in the silent Amidah, but only in the repetition of the Amidah. But we blow the shofar, we have our first set of 40 before Musaf, and then when we repeat the Amidah and Musaf, we have 3 times of 10 shofar blasts each at the end of each of the 3 middle blessings. And then we make up at the end either 30 and 10 or all 40 together, or however we make up to 100. So some Hasidim, I think some Sfaradim also blow the shofar in the silent Amidah at the end of each of these blessings. No, that's not the point over here. So according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Malchiot, which again is the main theme of the day, is chucked in with the Kedushat Hashem in the first 3 blessings, and then Kedushat Hayom, the sanctity of the day, is one of the 3 middle ones, along with the Shofrot and Zichronot and Shofrot. Now I understand that because the verse also, the Torah seems to also do that. That the idea of Malchiot is kind of is in the previous verse, and then the main concepts in the verse about Rosh Hashanah are Shabbaton and then Zikaron and Truah. So Yochanan ben Nuri's Amidah is following kind of the structure of the verse about Rosh Hashanah. Rekiva is not Krista. Amar Rekiva. If you're not blowing the shofar after Malchiot, because it's included in the first 3 brachot, so what are you even saying it for? Elo Amir Avot Gvurot Kedusha Hashem. So Rekiva says no. You do the first 3 brachot, regular first 3 brachot, right? With the additions for Rosh Hashanah, obviously. And then you include Malchiot in the first of the middle 3 blessings. With the sanctity of the day, and you blow the shofar afterwards. Then Zichronot v'tokea, say remembrance and blow the shofar. Shofarot v'tokea, talk about shofar and blow the shofar. Then V'amir Avodah, Hodah, Birkat Kohanim, and then you end with the last 3 brachot. So just, what does this look like? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says the first 2 brachot, then when you have Kedusha, you include kingship there, and then the middle 3 are sanctification of the day, remembrance and Shofrot, and the last 3 brachot. Rabbi Akiva, and this is what we do, is our custom, the first 3 brachot are the first 3 brachot, then you include Malchiot with Kedushat Hayom, and then Zichronot and Shofrot, and then the last 3 brachot. So that is, and Rabbi Akiva also makes sense, because we want to have shofar, we want to, right, what do you say, Kabel Berachamim Es Seder Malchiotenu, we want to blow the shofar when we finish saying the blessing about Malchut. That's why in the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah, the end of that first of the middle 3 brachot is very long, because you have to include both the day and kingship as well. I'll do this because it's here, but I'm not sure I really needed to do this. The Machloka continues. That was Yochanan ben Nuri and Rabbi Akiva. Then a couple of generations later, we also have a Machloket. V'heichan omer Kedush hayom. Where do you say the sanctity of the day? Tanya Rabbi Omer im Malchiot Amar. Rabbi says you say it with Malchiot, which is the same as Rabbi Akiva's opinion, but he gives an explanation. Ma matzinu b'kol makom b'revi'it, avkam b'revi'it. What do we find every other time? Every other Musaf festival, we say Kedush hayom is the fourth blessing. So to here, it's the fourth blessing. Now that's a bit funny because there's three, then the middle blessing, and then three at the end. So it's number four. But that's, here we've got three middle blessings, which is what Rabban Shimon Gamliel says, who is Rabbi Yoranasi's father. So it's a bit odd, both that he's arguing with the Rebbe's arguing with his father, and also odd that Rebbe is mentioned first, because normally the Gemara, or the Mishnah the Gemara quotes people chronologically, unless there's a reason not to. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Ima Zichrot Amra. You say Kedushat Hayom in the middle bracha Zichronot. Ma'amatzinu v'kol makom be'emtza, because every other festival, the Kedushat Hayom is in the middle, right? You have three first brachas, three last brachas, and the middle bracha is Kedushat Hayom. So Avkan be'emtza, so to Rosh Hashana, it should be bracha number 5, which is the middle of the 9 brachot. And then K'shekitshu Beit Din et Shana ba'Usha. One time they sanctified the new year in Usha, up in the Galilee. And so all the rabbis are there, and they're having a big Rosh Hashana davening. Yerad Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka lifnei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, v'asak Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka was davening in Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's shul, and he followed the opinion of Yochanan ben Nuri, right? Meaning that the Malchiot is part of Kedushat Hashem. Amar ben Shimon, Lo hayuna again can be Yavna. That's not what we used to do in Yavna when the Sanhedrin was in Yavna. L'yom Sheni, next day of Rosh Hashana, Yarad Rabbi Chanina benosh Rabbi Yosef Glili v'asak Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Chanina comes and he's davening. He follows Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Amar ben Shimon ben Gamliel, Kach hayuna again be Yavna. That's what we used to do in Yavna. So there's no the halacha is not, this is the way it must be because some reason, but rather the custom in Yavna, which is the custom we follow now, is to do it according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. So, wait, where are my slides? Well, now I have 2 more slides. Surely I have 2 more slides. Please tell me I've got 2 more slides. I do. Did I not save the thing? So I just wanted to finish with going back. So that's the structure of the Rosh Hashana Amida. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop showing this for a minute and share a different file instead if I can. Maybe this version of it is going to be better. Oh, I don't want to do that now. What are you doing? Sorry. No. Okay, let me try again. Open and share. I'm not quite sure why I didn't get my last 2 slides. Oh, go away. Nope. Nothing's happening. Let's try it. 3rd time lucky, otherwise I can just, I've got to work around. Attention. Oops. Yes, okay. No, that's not what I wanted. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so what I wanted to say is just to go back to the verse at the beginning and see if we can work out a connection between why kingship is not mentioned in the verses about Rosh Hashana. We're either taking it from the verse before or a verse in the next book along. And I think maybe this is really what the concept of kingship is all about, and Rosh Hashanah is all about, or at least part of it, if I'm being soppy. Right, this is the verse we said that preceding the Torah section about Rosh Hashanah, we have this thing about when you're harvesting your fields and you should leave stuff for the poor people, I am the Lord your God. And that's why we say kingship. So I would like to suggest, and again, this is me making it up, so feel free to disagree. But this is even though this is not part of the Rosh Hashanah verses, this is an essential precursor for having Rosh Hashanah and an essential precursor for understanding the concept of kingship. Because this verse talks about, and the verse before it talk about gifts that you give to the poor people, providing for the poor of society. And I'm not trying to get soppy and say give tzedakah and then for Rosh Hashanah. Of course you should do that. But what it means to be a king is what is it? Why do we have kings at all, or any kind of leadership? But once upon a time we were hunter-gatherers and nomads, and then we started getting together and living in fixed settlements. And the main job of the king is to protect the settlement. The king raises the army. The king builds a castle, builds walls around a city, and protects the inhabitants from enemies that are coming in. And I guess goes out and conquers other places as well. But the role of the king is to protect the people. And that means not only protect the people physically by having an army, but also protect the people by making sure that it's now his responsibility to make sure that everybody has enough food to eat, that the poor people are not starving to death. Right? And I mean, of course, there's been many bad kings in history, but the role of a good king is to provide for the poor and the needy, and provide for the physical needs of the people. And that's what this concept of taking leket shech, leaving gifts to the poor, so that when you're harvesting, right, then you can leave them for the poor people to eat. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, there, I'm Lord your God, means I as king am commanding you, the Jewish people, to provide for your poor people, because that's the role of God as a king. We're not just saying, right, it doesn't say I'm Ani Hashem Malkeichem, I'm God your king. I'm the Lord your God, because in this role of providing for the poor people, that's what it means to be a king. And that's a precursor to coming and having Rosh Hashanah. Because if we don't have a king who's protecting, if we don't have a God who cares about everybody in society, if the king is only the king for the dukes and the nobles and the wealthy people, and he's only interested in aggrandizing himself and his court, and again, there have been many kings. That's not the kind of king that we want God to be on Rosh Hashanah. We're not talking about those kings or dictators who took everything for themselves and didn't do their job of providing for the people. We want God as king in the most basic sense of what it means to be a king, which is to protect the nation from external enemies and from internal fights. That's why the king is the judge. That's why the king is the seat of power and authority, because looking after everybody in the kingdom. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense that this is kingship, which precedes the verse on Rosh Hashanah, and that is connected to the agricultural gifts that are given to the poor people. That's according to one opinion that I can't remember, and the second opinion that I can't remember says that it has to do with Yom Simchatchem U'Moadechem Ani Hashem Elokeichem. When you're coming and celebrating, you've come to Jerusalem or to Shiloh or to wherever the altar is, and you're celebrating. It's Yom Tiv, and you've got everything you want, and you're happy, and you're blowing your trumpet in joy. You've got to remember, that's when you remember what it means to be God. When you're barren like Hannah, when you're starving, when you're missing something in your life, when everything is miserable, it's easy to believe in God and pray to God and want God. But just like Hannah, when she received what she wanted, when you have everything you need, when you feel happy, when things are going great, right? B'yom simchatchem, on the day that you're happy, that's when you need to make God into the king. That's when you need to acknowledge that God is the king. That's the difference between God as kind of a handout. Yes, can I have something? Can I have something? Can I have something? Sure, here you go. So God was saying, no, God, I recognize you as king, who gives me everything that I need. Not that I want something, but that you are the king. So I think these two verses actually are very apt and appropriate to be the concept of kingship for Rosh Hashanah. And it's not that they are secondary to the Zichronot and the Shofrot, but rather they're so primary and fundamental that nothing else can happen without those verses. So either That's the verse before, which defines what it means to be a king, or it's a verse entirely separately saying, Yom Simchatchem. That's fundamentally what the role is of being king, and therefore nothing else would make any sense if we didn't have God, if we didn't believe and make God into the king, the kind of a king who protects us, who provides for us, who cares about us. And that's it. So I'll see you next week in Mirz Hashem, and we'll talk about these 3 sections of the Amidah and the verses that we say for each of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.